Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Volume 1 of Batman Knightfall. Now, Knightfall is a story arc which spanned over a couple of issues of Batman, and this is the story arc that first introduced the character of Bane, who would go on to become a very iconic Batman villain. Now, this story arc was primarily written by Chuck Dixon and Doug Moench. However, Alan Grant also wrote a few issues of this story arc. Now, all the Batman comics that fall into the Knightfall story arc were all put together in this collection. Now, there are actually 3 volumes of this collection, but so far I've only read Volume 1, so I'm reviewing Volume 1. At some point I am going to read Volumes 2 and 3, but I'm probably not going to get around to reviewing those till next year, because every January I review different Batman comics, so you probably won't be seeing reviews of Volumes 2 and 3 of this story arc from me until next year. Now, the basic plotline of Knightfall is this man who calls himself Bane comes to Gotham City. Now, not only is Bane extremely intelligent, but he also has this drug called Venom, which he injects into his body through his mask, and this drug Venom actually increases the size of his muscles and gives him superhuman strength. So even in the beginning of this story arc, Batman is already not in the best of health, and Bane ends up breaking all the inmates out of Arkham Asylum. So throughout the whole story, Batman has to go after all these escaped patients and send them back to Arkham, and this is only taking a physical and psychological toll on Bruce Wayne. And in the story, you see conflicts between Batman and Robin, because Robin, or Tim Drake, who of course was the third Robin, he's trying to get Bruce Wayne to kind of give it a rest, like he's telling him that he's pushing himself too far, but Batman won't listen to him. And it turns out that Bane's ultimate goal is to break Batman both physically, spiritually, and mentally. And in this story arc, there's a character named Jean Paul Valley, or John Paul Valley, however you say it, and let's just say he ends up being a very important character in this story arc. Now, Knightfall I thought was a really interesting story arc. Now, granted, I've only read part 1. I still have to read parts 2 and 3 of this series, but so far I can definitely say I'm enjoying this story. And Bane really is an interesting villain. Now, Bane actually does have kind of a tragic backstory when you really stop to think about it. Like, he was actually born in a prison. Like, Bane's father was one of the people who tried starting this revolution in this, like, third world country, and the revolution failed, and he managed to escape the authorities, so as punishment, they ended up taking this woman who he impregnated and arresting her, and his son had to carry out his life sentence. So Bane was born in this hellish prison, and he was meant to stay there his whole life. So, when you really stop to think about it, he does have a pretty tragic backstory. And that's the same with a lot of Batman's villains. Like, a lot of Batman's enemies really are just lost souls, and you really do get the idea that if things turned out differently for a lot of Batman's enemies, maybe they could have turned out to be normal people. The same as Batman. If things turned out differently for Bruce Wayne when he was a child, maybe he could have turned out to be a normal person too. So it kind of shows you, at least on a philosophical level, that Batman is almost no different from the enemies he fights. And in this story, you really do get the idea that Batman and Bane are almost two sides of the same coin. Like, they both had fucked up childhoods that have shaped them into what they became. Of course, with Batman, his fucked up childhood really kind of shaped him into something positive, while with Bane, his fucked up childhood shaped him into something more negative. And I also really liked Bane's henchmen in this story, because his his henchmen are actually pretty three-dimensional characters, especially the character of Zombie. Now, as I said, the character of Bane has gone on to become a pretty iconic Batman villain, and eventually he got incorporated into Batman the Animated Series, but I'm not gonna lie, I really did not like the version of Bane from Batman the Animated Series, and I love Batman the Animated Series. It's just, that version of Bane was very two-dimensional in my opinion, but nothing is as bad as what Joel Schumacher did to the character in Batman and Robin. Bane ended up being one of the villains in Batman and Robin, and dear God, they completely raped Bane in that movie. Bane was also the main villain of The Dark Knight Rises, which was the third film in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. And honestly, I think the version of Bane from The Dark Knight Rises... Now, The Dark Knight Rises had its flaws, and the version of Bane from that movie did alter a lot of stuff about the character from the comics, but I honestly feel that's probably the best adaptation of the character. But yeah, if you're a Batman fan, I would definitely recommend reading Knightfall, and bye.